and Good Vibes, your podcast all about growing fruits and vegetables and the sustainable lifestyle that comes along with it. We are your hosts, as always, Colin and Mitchell. And you know we're passionate about all things green and growing. And this week, in the green and growing category, we're going to talk about different varieties of all these different plants. This can be sort of daunting for beginner gardeners, or if you're looking to kind of expand your gardening hobby into some interesting plants, interesting varieties. We're going to make it simple today to understand some of our favorite plants that have really interesting varieties and, of course, are edible. So go ahead and sit back, grab a cup of coffee, and join us. Let's go ahead and get started on it. We have a lot of different, plants to cover today. So we are going to go ahead and start now with beans. So, Mitchell, why don't you start us off with beans? What are kind of the different things we're looking for when we're picking out what kind of bean do we want to grow this year?
Yeah, so a couple different types of beans, of course. I would say that probably the biggest differentiator for beans when you start looking for what type you want, I would say the pole bean and the bush bean. So the
And
bush
what's the
bean,
difference there?
yeah, the bush bean's gonna grow. Honestly, I've never grown bush beans, so correct me if I'm wrong. But just, I mean, as the name implies, it's more of a bush, kind of stays pretty stable in the same location. I don't even know. Do you need a trellis for bush beans? Do you know?
If you do, it's just a real kind of a real small one to just barely support. I have grown a bunch of bush beans, and I've used trellises sometimes, like a half tomato cage size, but you really don't need them.
Mm-hmm. Okay. And then the pole bean, as the name also implies, it's going to grow more. It could grow like up a pole, so it's going to be much more vinier than the bush bean. And I don't really know either. The difference between the type of beans that those two can produce, I think it's pretty similar, right? The type
It
of
is.
bean, it's just the type of growth that the plant does. Yeah. So you've got those two varieties, and then in those varieties, you have all different types of beans. A big differentiator is the color of the beans. So you have purple, yellows, and greens. I would say that's are the most popular colors. The flavor of the bean, is it going to be sweet? Is it more used for cooking? Is it better to eat raw straight off the plant? Or, like I said, is it better to cook? And then just to mention one specific variety as well, one of the most frost hardy types of beans. Beans usually aren't very frost tolerant at all, but fava beans specifically, very frost hardy. So you can plant those earlier in the season, or also kind of towards the end of summer whenever it's starting to cool down again and come into fall. And I just want to mention as well for beans, yard beans, which is one that I'm growing this year. And the name yard means like the size. It grows like as large as a yard measurement. Very excited about those, hoping to get a good harvest. But anything I missed on beans, Colin?
Yeah, just you pretty much covered all the choices. So here are the ones that we chose this year, right? So we are doing Mitchell, as he said, he's doing the yard bean. We're both going to do a rattlesnake bean, which these
Mm-hmm.
are a pole variety. So we're actually going to grow these up some corn stalks, and corn is something we'll be talking about later in this episode. And then we're also doing a bush bean that's royal burgundy, and that's a purple color. I also do have a yellow variety that I'm growing um, as well, just for a different color. Those are going to taste very similar, guys. Like the green, the yellow, the purple. It's just sort of
Mm-hmm.
for pizzazz, or just to brighten up the plate or something like that. It doesn't really provide too much variation in taste, even though they might look different. So,
Mm-hmm.
all
Yeah,
right.
I'll just say rattlesnake beans are kind of native to this area. Like it says Southwest ish North America. So I'm curious to see how they'll do in California because they always do
Yeah.
fantastic here. So I'm very excited.
Well, I'll tell you, my starts, I got really good germination on them. I know you're saying that some of yours were having trouble. I don't know if it's a difference in what we're
Hmm.
using, but I had like almost perfect. So I got 4 plants
Oh
ready,
wow.
ready to go. So hopefully
Huh.
they'll do good. We'll grow them up
Yeah,
something.
definitely. Maybe I just planted them wrong. I might have planted them a little too deep. So that
Well,
could
it
be
might,
it
it
too.
also might be your media. Like you need to sift your stuff, like we talked about, trying to get more of those
Hmm.
large particles out of there.
Yeah,
That might
agreed.
just be the difference too.
Mm-hmm.
All right, going on to the next plant we're talking about. I'll take this one, and we're talking about the cucumber here. So, tons of different things you can look for with cucumbers. Maybe not the most dense in choices. That would probably be something like a pepper or tomato, but these you're going to look at, okay, how big are they going to grow? Am I growing them specifically for flavor? And then finally, pickles obviously are cucumbers. So am I looking specifically just to grow them to then pickle those cucumbers immediately? So, um, talking about some different things here in the size, you're going to get some up to 3 feet long. That's one that we're growing this year. I'll go ahead and mention that's called the Armenian cucumber. So those can be up to a yard long, and technically a member of the melon family, which actually gives it some properties that are really beneficial. So a little bit longer harvest window, and obviously that larger fruit size, and very refreshing and things like that. A little bit higher water content. So that's really really nice. So then when we're talking about flavor, that's just something to look up. Is this something that has maybe won a taste test winner or something like that? And you can even look specifically for those. Hey, what are cucumbers that are great for taste, if that's what you're doing. And then there's specific pickling ones. And the things about the pickling is that's going to grow to kind of a determined size, which is sort of that normal size that you would see, if you've ever had a pickle spear or something like that, about that size, right? In
Mm-hmm.
Fit nicely in a jar, good for pickling. It also has that sort of that absorbent property that allows it to take in that brine and have that process happen. The only other thing that you're looking for, you might see this on a few different varieties of cucumber called burbless or burbed cucumber. And that just is like barbs basically. And those little barbs kind of like a little mini cactus spike. They're not quite as sharp, but if you're picking them, you'll notice them for sure. They can be a
Mm-hmm.
little bit sharp. Um, it, don't worry too much about that. Like if you realize, oh no, I got a variety that has the spikes on it, with just a glove, you can just rub the outside of the cucumber. And a lot of times this even happens during the washing process, and those just come right off. So I have grown some with and without. Obviously, without, you don't have to worry about it. But even with, it's not too bad. Not too bad. So the ones that we are growing this year, we are growing a lemon cucumber. And so this is sort of an interesting variety. It's small in size, so we're probably going to get more fruits out of the vine. It's also known for flavor, and you can pickle it. So this is like a great across the board cucumber. A little bit of everything. It's not going to be, super great for maybe any of them, other than probably the flavor, but works a little bit in each category. So that's great. We can experiment with whatever we're trying to do. And then our second one is the Armenian, like I talked about. That one we're growing mainly for size. And the properties, the window of harvest is a little longer in some of those properties. That's really nice. All right, Mitchell,
Mm-hmm.
let's anything I missed there on the cucumber?
Um, I'll just say I had no idea the Armenian cucumbers could get up to a yard long. So
Yeah.
that's crazy. I had no idea. I was googling after you said that, and this is actually kind of relevant for all cucumbers, I would say. But it says for the Armenian, if you're planning on eating them, you should pick them around 12 inches long because they can get up to a yard, 3 feet, but then they're gonna just become a little tougher and maybe not as sweet. And that's how it is for a lot of cucumbers. The smaller you pick them, usually just the more tender they are. I mean, that's most vegetables, honestly.
Right. That makes
um,
sense, and I'm glad to know that because I probably would have let it
Let them
go.
all go.
What do you can you pickle it if
um,
it's gets to that 3 foot size? What does it say that they use them for?
uh,
Or maybe
uh,
maybe you just can't.
yeah, I bet you could probably pickle it. It's just going to be tougher if you try to eat it raw.
Yeah, I got you.
Harvest it, yeah. But and as well, certain cucumbers. I don't know specifically which ones, but whenever you do pickle them, it's good to shave the skin off of some if they have a little bit of a tougher
Yeah,
skin. But I'm sure some episode in the future, I'd love to do an actual like canning and pickling episode. But we'll get into
yeah,
more
we'll
detail in
do it.
that what a different podcast. But yep, no, I think that's it. We'll move into corn now. So two big different varieties of corn. You have edible and you have non-edible. The edible usually is more of just the sweet corn. So that's ones that you can just, after you grow it, take it straight off of the stalk and then you can bite right into it right in the yard. Those are my personal favorite just because I love that flavor. It's so different than buying corn from the store. It's like all plants. Growing it yourself, it's always going to taste better. And then you have the non-edible. So this is, you can make it into popcorn and you can also mill it. So make it into like a corn flour and then use it for cooking. The non-edibles, typically those are going to be like ornamental, so a little more colorful looking. I think you were saying earlier they can usually store a little bit longer. They don't dry out as quick as the like sweet corn could. And for this category, what we're currently growing this year is the sweet corn, like I mentioned. Obviously, you can't go wrong with that. And then we are doing the glass gem for our non-edible. It's kind of weird. It's called non-edible, but you can still like eat it in a way, but just don't take a bite into the garden. I don't think you would
Right.
enjoy that.
It, it just means like it needs to be processed, I think is sort of how
Mm-hmm.
I look at it.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
And you're saying you have a albino corn this year, right? That came up.
Yeah, I'm not
Right.
sure if that's exact. Yeah, that's sort of my best guess. So, if you've grown corn from seed before, they come up, they're like little pieces of grass, corn's a grass. So, looks just like a wide blade grass, nice green color. Well, I got one that came up really light yellow color. So, I put it in the garden. I, kind of put it away from everything else just in case it was something wrong. I still have like all my best sprouts in my planned area, but I have a little extra somewhere else just to see like if that's going to grow and develop or I'm not expecting it to go too far, but if I end up like with a white corn stalk at the end of the season, that would be awesome.
Yeah, that'd be amazing. Definitely save some seeds from that.
Yeah.
You can. Anything else on corn you got?
Nope, I think pretty much nailed it there.
Okay.
All right, let's go into squash now then as our next thing. So you've got two big, once again, and this is sort of a good thing to realize. Most things they're going to have a big major differentiating factor, and then each one of those might have another couple options. So this can help you remember and just make it seem not so overwhelming. I mean, it seems like these gardeners that have been gardening for a long time, like, oh yeah, they've got all their varieties figured out. And as a new gardener, it can be hard to be like, okay, well, what do I even try? And it's all in the spirit of experimentation, trying out new things, seeing what works and what doesn't. So, anyway, back to the thing at hand. Squash. We have two big differentiating factors. We have the winter variety and the summer variety. Okay, so this is once again a little misleading. The winter variety doesn't mean that it's going to grow into winter. It just stores longer. So these are like squash that you would store over winter, or store for the winter, we could say, or something like that. Whereas
Mm-hmm.
the summer ones, you're going to eat more fresh. Okay. So in the summer squash category, we're talking about your classic yellow summer squash. The crookneck squash is in this category. Zucchini is in this category. In the winter squash category, we're looking at like butternut squash, going into like gourds and things like that. Those things that you see like people make water bottles out of. That would be a winter squash. Obviously, a gourd like that's gonna hold up for a long time. So that's pretty much how squash is broken down. It's not too complex there. What are we growing this year in squash? Well, we're going this year for kind of a smaller squash so that we can, eat them sort of the whole fruit for the meal instead of having this large fruit that you have to section up and have a higher probability of wasting. So we're growing a round zucchini variety. It's a really pretty variety, and the reason we're growing this is just because of its size. So
Mm-hmm.
that's pretty much the rundown of squash. Anything else that you're growing on that,
Yeah.
Mitchell?
No, that's it for zucchini as well.
Oh wait,
But
I have to mention I am growing a couple other squash. I just remembered. I'm growing
oh,
a couple winter squash. I am growing a butternut squash, and I'm growing some spaghetti squash, which is really delicious. I love store bought spaghetti squash, and I tried to
mm,
grow it last year under the false like pretense that the winter squash could grow in colder climates. So I tried to grow it in fall, and it just didn't last through the cold nights and stuff like that. So we're gonna
mm.
hopefully make it right this year and get some successful spaghetti squash.
Is it called that because it kind of looks like spaghetti on the inside? Basically, it almost has little like strings whenever you bake it and cut into it.
Yeah, so it's used a lot for like a substitute for spaghetti, a vegetable substitute. Because what you do is you cut it in
Oh,
half, olive oil. Well, you clean it out if the the seeds and stuff. Olive oil it, salt and pepper, whatever seasoning. You bake it for a certain period of time, and then you get a fork and you run the fork in through the squash, and it comes out like little spaghetti strings.
hmm.
And they're delicious too. I mean, hearty and very similar to like normal spaghetti.
I was
But
looking at
yeah,
pictures. That looks
really
really
good.
cool. Yeah, and I'll say too, I'm a little embarrassed to say that when we were researching like this topic this morning, and you mentioned winter squash, it's like you can grow squash in the winter. That's amazing. I had no idea. So you're not alone, folks out there. It's okay. It's a learning experience.
That's right. That's right.
We'll do peppers next, which is a big category. I think everyone, when you get into vegetable gardening, peppers is always going to be one of the first things people recommend for you to get. And two, like a lot of these, actually, I didn't even really notice that two main categories. You have the spicy, and then you have the not spicy, or like the sweeter peppers. Spicy, I think, well, like jalapenos, habaneros. I mean, there's ghost peppers, of course. That just the scale goes up and up on that. And you have sweet peppers. One of my favorite sweet peppers is the sweet banana peppers. So they pretty much stay yellow the whole time. You believe you want to pick them when they're yellow. I think if you leave them on there long enough, they do turn red, and it's
Mm.
probably fine. But and that's another differentiating factor on peppers is, of course, the color. And they come in all sorts of, I mean, reds, yellows, greens. I think typically for a lot of peppers, they start the green. If you leave them on there, they kind of turn a yellowish, and then you keep leaving them on there, then they'll turn that red color. And for a lot of them, that's when you know that they're ready. um, and as well, the different kind of sizes of peppers. You're growing the pequeño pepper, is that right?
Mm-hmm.
Which
Yeah, it's
basically
a
just a
really
really
small
tiny.
chili. Yeah, a really small spicy pepper.
Mm-hmm. And you got, so the small ones, and those are usually called horned peppers. They're kind of the shape of it's like an upside down horn, basically, where it comes to a point. And then you have the bell peppers, which almost shaped kind of like an apple. Like it's just a little
Mm-hmm.
chunkier thing, and it doesn't come to a point. And as well for peppers, you have more ornamental types. So we were looking at Botanical Interests website this morning, and you have the one that we thought looked really, I mean, it looks really cool. The black
Yeah,
pearl ornamental pepper. It doesn't even really look like peppers. They're like little berry looking things, but what was the Scoville?
like
30,000.
30,000.
So yeah,
Yeah.
so but super pretty plant with like little black um, little fruits almost looking, and really pretty flowers. So, and if you type ornamental pepper into Google, you'll see really colorful plants as well. Where you're not really supposed to eat the pepper, you can, but they're going to be really spicy. It's more for just a nice look, and it's also going to bring bugs, probably birds into your garden, just to help that diversity. Um, this year we are growing shishito peppers. We're both growing. That's one that's very popular in the like culinary aspect, right, for cooking. And then I'm also growing. I found some random seeds, cubanelle peppers, which are sweet, a little sweeter, and that's usually what I'm a fan of. I like sweet peppers that I can just eat straight in the garden, and I don't have to worry about my tongue being on fire. But I think that's about it. I did You've mentioned to me before about overwintering peppers. Could you talk about that for just a second? Because I'm not even too familiar about it, but it's something I might want to try this year now that I have a greenhouse. Go.
Right. And that is something that you need to keep in mind. Like this is something for people that have a greenhouse or live in a warm climate. And even, we had just a slightly colder than normal winter, and then also a lot more rain. So both of those things could have played into it. But I tried to overwinter my peppers just outside zone 9B, just as a reminder, that's where I am, and it just wasn't quite enough. They still died off. So here's the process that I would recommend for everybody, kind of regardless of what climate you're in. I'd say, just to be safe, if you really want to get a successful overwinter, here's the process. So you're growing your pepper throughout the season, gets into late fall, starts to get a little colder overnight. The pepper's done producing. What you want to do is cut it back to sort of its main portions. So let's say it's just like a normal one stem that Y's off. So you want to cut, just so you just have that Y shape. Any additional branching or leaves, cut that down. Just minimize the plant as much as possible. Go ahead and dig it
Mhm.
up, as gently as you can without disturbing the roots too much, and pot that up. Go ahead and cover the pot, fill it up, and water it in, and then go ahead and put that in your greenhouse and just keep it watered off and on. You don't have to water it nearly as much. It's kind of in a dormant state, remember that. And then once it starts warming up and you can get that greenhouse back up to temperature, great. Then it'll do its thing. It'll start branching off, producing the leaves. You'll increase the water as well when you see that, and then you're ready to plant it out early, where you're normally, like right now, I'm putting my seedlings out right now. They're very small, but I could
Mhm.
have like a fully developed pepper plant if I overwintered, right? And so that's the benefit. You can't, I've heard this can be done with tomatoes if you have a very large greenhouse. This can also be done with eggplant. They're all part of the nightshade family, so that makes sense, right? But peppers are one that's really popular just because of the size of the plant. It's really convenient to do that, whereas eggplants and especially tomatoes can get very, very large.
Yeah.
So
I might try that with my patio tomatoes since those stay small. I didn't even think about that as
yeah,
well.
maybe like a dwarf varieties or small varieties might be good to try that
Hmm.
out with. Yeah.
And I'll just quickly mention potatoes, and then you can move on to the next category. I recently went to the store and bought at the Asian market and bought Asian purple sweet potatoes. And if you Google that, when you cut into them, it's a very vibrant purple color inside that we don't really see very often. Like, here in the U.S., we just have kind of sweet potatoes or potatoes, white potatoes. So just very excited about that. Obviously potatoes and sweet potatoes, different variety. Um, and just to talk about that a little bit, I'm planning on you need to it's called chitting the potatoes, where you set them out maybe like on a cool windowsill for it's like a month or so. And basically you're having those eyes start to produce roots. They're getting ready to basically be wanted to be planted into the ground. So starting that process now, and I will keep you all updated. But Colin, I think you are good to move on to the next one.
Awesome. So we're going on to the biggest category here. We're going on to tomatoes. So this is the one where you're going to find the most options and variety. And, that's great, but you need to be able to sort through it. So there are quite a few determining factors with tomatoes. So let's talk about it. First off, let's talk about, very simply, you've probably, if you even eat tomatoes at all, you probably know about this one, the size of the fruit, right? So there's larger tomatoes for slicing, all the way down to very small cherry tomatoes for things like, salads or something like that, or just eating fresh out of the garden, which I love. Okay, so that's the size of the fruit. We also can talk about the size of the plant, right? There are dwarf varieties and normal varieties, and then within the normal varieties there are determinate, and here's what that means. That means the size of the plant is determined. It also means all of the fruit are going to come to ripeness around the same time, right? So the harvest is going to be large, but probably only one. And indeterminate is going to give you more tomatoes over a longer period of time. So they're going to ripen at different time periods. And also the growth is indeterminate, right? So we don't know how big it's going to get. It's just going to continue to grow as long as conditions permit and continue to produce fruit during that time. So a lot of times your cherry tomatoes are going to be indeterminate, right? They can grow really large and produce you a lot of cherries. A lot of times the tomatoes that are used for things like pasta sauce, you're going to want a determinate variety where you can get a lot of tomatoes at once and process that large amount of tomatoes pretty quickly into sauce or something like that. Okay, and then
Mm.
also, taste, of course. Tomatoes are one of the most delicious things in the garden, juicy and a lot, like we said, a lot of different variety and taste. So there's sweetness, some that are more sweet. There's acidity, some that are more towards the acidic side of the tomato. And as far as within sort of the good tasting ones, you're going to see some that have a lot of like liquid in them. You can also see some that are very kind of solid throughout. And those solid ones are usually called like the slicers. Those are good for sandwiches and things like that. Whereas sometimes the high water content but low seeds, or you know also large fruit or something like that, those can be good for sauce, because of those sort of things. So out of all of this stuff, right, just think about what are you going to use your tomatoes for, and look for things that can fill those roles, maybe with an interesting twist every now and then. So here is what we're growing. So we're both growing in the small variety. So we've chosen a small plant that produces small fruit. So it's called a patio variety, which is just meant for containers, and it's a yellow patio cherry tomato. So that's what we're both growing as far as the smalls go. On the large end of things, we're growing an indeterminate. Um, so these are called pole tomatoes, sort of like the pole bean, that just like keeps growing up, the pole tomato in a similar sense. And it's called the pineapple pole tomato. It's a taste test winner. So it's a larger fruit that's known for taste. On top of that, I am also growing a dwarf version of this pineapple pole tomato that I found at a local nursery close to
Oh,
me.
cool.
So I was interested about that. And I'm growing in a very similar type of tomato to the pineapple. It's a pole tomato. But it's kind of got a purple hue on the outside, and that one's called black creme. So it turns that dark purple or even black color when it gets ripe. So I'm growing those as well. Anything else that you're growing in that
Mm.
category, Mitchell?
Um, no, that's it this year. I'm hoping some of the tomatoes that kind of just fell to the ground last year come up this year. So I'm just keeping an eye out. Two of those that I'll mention, the purple Cherokee tomatoes that
Oh
I
yeah.
grew last year, they look super cool. I love like all kind of like dark fruits and stuff. However, wasn't the best tasting. It wasn't bad, but very more visually appealing than like taste appealing in my opinion, but still good. I still ate them, of course. And then the sun sugar I grew last year, just basically little yellow cherry tomatoes, super tasty. Those are by far my favorite. I really like sweet tomatoes over more of like the acidity tomatoes. And I think the more acidic tomatoes, I would probably say those are the ones that are used for cooking more than, because you don't really
Yeah.
have too like sweet of spaghetti sauce. It's usually a little more acidic.
Right. You're gonna add your
um,
sweetness into that sauce with sugar or something in the cooking
yeah,
process. So yeah, I would say that you're
yep,
right on them with that.
hmm yep. And I'll just say, moving off of tomatoes, kind of our last little section, just like a little miscellaneous section here. There's also, when you're talking about just like fruits in general, or kind of plants in general, you almost always find some type of like frost hardy plant like variety. Kind of like how we mentioned, like beans usually aren't very frost tolerant at all, but then you have the fava beans, which are frost tolerant. So, and in this category, in my backyard, I've got a Chicago hardy fig, which usually like a fig tree, is not very frost tolerant. However, this specific variety is super frost tolerant. I mean, it loses all its leaves during the winter. It basically looks dead, but then you have leaves coming out from the plant during the spring, coming out from the stems that were already above the ground. So it doesn't come all the way out from the ground. The stems actually regrow their leaves. at least like halfway up the tree. Some of the stems do die about halfway back. And then as well, you can get passion fruit, for example. I grow here. It completely dies to the ground every year. So frost tolerant, maybe a little too much, but it will come back every year. And passion fruit kind of grows, I believe all types kind of grows very viney. So I have it growing up my fence, and it just completely covers the fence every year. It's fantastic. You can eat the leaves. The leaves are edible. The fruit, it's not going to be probably like the passion fruit you find at the stores where it has that kind of full creamy inside. This kind of passion fruit is more so kind of seedy and more sour, but it's still very fun to eat, very fun to grow. And then just two more little things. I'll say you can grow certain types of fruit that cannot handle frost, like a lime tree, for example. I'm going to be buying one here soon, and then during the winter, you just put it in the house or you put it in the greenhouse. Overwinter it, kind of like how Colin was talking about the peppers, and then you can bring it back out during the warmer seasons. So you can get pretty creative about what types of fruits you want to grow, especially if you have a greenhouse. That's a big help. And then I'll just say lastly, for almost all types of vegetables, or for very, very many, you can almost always find a red version of that vegetable. So, just for example, you have like red lettuces, of course, and then you also have the red okra, which I think just looks really cool. I really love like red plants, purple plants, black plants. I think they just look super sweet because most things are usually green, which is really cool too. But then when you get a different variety color, I think it's kind of like a shiny Pokemon. Like, it just looks exciting.
Yeah.
It looks different.
Yeah, there's also red
But
cabbage, and like we were talking about, like the Cherokee purple tomato and stuff like that. Purple
mm-hmm.
beans. So yeah, there's always cool color varieties in whatever you want to grow.
Yep, yep. I think that's about it for me. Anything else, Colin? Varieties?
Yeah, I mean, just have fun with varieties, I would say. Like, look into what your goals are, this year. Maybe look at what you've grown before. If you're an experienced gardener, think about what maybe could have been better and sort of assess, not only your goals, but your experience, and then go into the varieties with that sort of as your base. And then always, like I said, with the sort of attitude of experimentation, like what's one thing that looks crazy that I want to try this year. So, Mitchell and
Mm-hmm.
I, we're doing red okra this year. I don't think either of us are like loving okra as a thing to eat. Not
No,
necessarily,
or not.
you know, but it's just so cool, like you said, it's just like the shiny Pokemon effect. It's like okra is a really cool looking plant, and we got this awesome red variety. We got to give it a try.
mm-hmm.
So, and the same thing, I mean, we're doing like a giant watermelon this year that's yellow. We didn't talk about watermelons today, but just to touch on it, it's known for size and things like that. The inside isn't red, it's yellow. So that's really cool. Now,
Mm-hmm.
I've never grown a watermelon before, successfully. Mitchell has, but we're,
Mm-hmm.
this is something that's going to take a lot of time. It's going to take some good commitment, some good watering, some good space allocation in the garden, all of these things, right? And you can buy one at the store for like $2, right? But that's not what it's about. It's about the fact that we're going to be able to bring on a podcast to you guys one day, our watermelons. We're going to step on the scale. We're going to weigh them out, right? We're going to see who has the bigger one. So it's not only about, these varieties aren't only about taste, aren't only about what you can grow in your area. All of that's important, but there's also just an aspect of fun to it. And so that's what we have really found to be what gets us excited about actually exploring, hey, what varieties are able to be chosen in this vegetable or this vegetable. So
Mm-hmm.
I think that's a good place to end it. So we hope you guys enjoyed this one, episode 8, and we will see you next time.
Later.